Afternoon, everyone. As introduced, I'm Xanani Baloyi, and I am with the Stockholm International Water Institute. Is my slide, my presentation up here? Oh, okay. So I work as a program officer, and most of the projects that I'm involved in really, they seek to attract financing into the entire water value chain. So you'll see my presentation, I change it up a little bit during lunch, having seen that in the previous session, we had a lot, or we saw a lot of what are the technologies, or what is the challenge in Africa, which we know. So I'll run through some of those slides that reflect those things that were presented in the morning, and then try to look more forward in terms of some of the barriers have to do with the non-investable model of the space which smallholder farmers operate in. So some of you may know about SIWI. We're headquartered in Stockholm. We've got offices in Latin America, Africa, and recently opened an office in Amman. We work around transboundary water governance or water governance generally, and we also organize the World Water Week. We also do the Stockholm Junior Water Prize as part of our cross-cutting issues promotion. So these are just some of summaries of what SIWI really does. We have expertise in source to sea management, water diplomacy, shared waters partnership. And maybe you may ask yourselves why, as a water organization, we're involved in agriculture. It's because, as it has been said, over 80% of agricultural activity in sub-Saharan Africa is by smallholder farmers. And why is it an entry point for SIWI? Is because we see smallholder farmers as the frontline water managers, and they need assistance in managing the resource that they value the most, which is green water. So our entry point is on green water as an essential part of the water cycle, taken from our advisor, Marlon Falkenmark and Johan Rockstrom. And green water refers to the water that is only absorbed by plants at the root zone. And the water availability and soil moisture management are key determinants of crop yields and agricultural productivity. So that is the entry point where we come in as a water expertise organization. And in part of leveraging green water, or what maybe continuously in the previous presentation has been referred to, we understand that green water is the source of enhanced rainfed agriculture or rainfed agriculture, which most farmers depend on. But then we use these terms interchangeably, like conservation agriculture. So quickly, some of the benefits that that green water has is that, yes, it is water that is derived from rainfall, that is available for the soil, for the plant growth through transpiration, moisture stored in the soil from rainfall, and it is critical, but it is also overly overlooked component of the hydrological cycle. And then the program that I work on is called Transforming Investments in African Rainfed Agriculture. It addresses this water scarcity or challenge in rainfed agriculture, but then focusing so much on the financial component of it. And then this has also been presented, the types and use of cultivable land in Africa, and maybe it can also, Lucia, contribute to the discussion that you were having. Is it destructive agriculture, or are we promoting it, or what other alternative are they? It's a natural phenomenon that some sectors may be not an option to promote, except for sustainable expansion of agriculture on the continent, because it is the resource that we have and we have to make it work. And by us not having sustainably expanding agricultural land on Africa, it means by continuously importing food, all the jobs that would have been created on the African continent are also being realized in those other countries. So this is just to emphasize why we cannot look back on expanding sustainable agriculture. And then also, why transform investments on the African continent? Currently, there's only 5% of public investments that are dedicated to rain-fed agriculture, while 95% goes to irrigation, where irrigation is not the most suitable for our landscape. So that is why we call for investments in the forgotten smallholder farmers, which rely on rain-fed agriculture. And also mentioned in the morning, they are responsible for over 95% of food production on the continent, but receive the least investments. So we are working on a business case with the Zambezi Watercourse Commission, where their strategic plan that addresses livelihood support, infrastructure on the basin up until 2040. They have a livelihoods component which considers rain-fed agriculture as one of the areas that they would like to promote. And we have partnered with 4 local NGOs in Malawi, in Zimbabwe, and in Zambia as our pilot sites, with potential for scaling this across the river basin. And in the business case, we're looking at the rate of investment for the farmer, the rate of return on investment for the farmer, where we're looking at increased yields, we're looking at reduced risk of moisture variability, higher initial labor costs, construction materials, and one other NGO is actually measuring the biophysical and socioeconomic data, the rainfall, the soil types, land holding capacity, and so forth. And then the environmental benefits, we are expecting to, we are observing the reduced soil erosion, the lower sedimentation of watercourses, aquifer recharge, carbon sequestration in soil, soil fertility improvement, the package of reducing cost of inputs, and rainwater harvesting generally. And also part of the business case is expected to show results on the social benefits in terms of the local agricultural value chain being strengthened in the basin, the job opportunities that would be created, and then the yields increase, of course, they cut across the different environmental and farmer and social benefits. And this is not only being measured by one NGO. Some of you may be familiar with the NGOs. In Zimbabwe, we're working with FASHIG and CTDT. You may know of them. I think FASHIG is the NGO that uses the concept about Pumvuza, which is a form of conservation agriculture practice. And then in Malawi, we're working with an NGO called Dieni, where they are advocating for deep bed farming. But then this is just to mention that technologies exist, but then, there's not so much benefit in us arguing which one is better than which, but across the continent, they are well known. There's some of them not documented. Others is technologies that have been practiced by like our grandparents, our families, and there may be no need for them even to change, but then they're struggling to scale those up. So why are we doing the business case? The business case, we're doing this because we've realized that every time we approach investors, is it still fine? Every time we approach investors, we find ourselves making headway with a little bit of public financing or grant financing or philanthropies, but then that's like 3 to 5 years and then the project is finished. But then how do we ensure that there's continuity in these projects? That is the challenge that we have, is attracting private financiers or entrepreneurial communities into the sector to invest. So this is just also to show the framework for the calculation of the business study. And again, a summary of the environmental, economic, and social impact and benefits, and the key policies and institutional challenges hindering the adoption of the practices. So this is from the perspective of the NGO themselves. I tried to ask our comms to make this reader friendly, but they didn't come through for me. I think it was last minute. So I wanted them to develop some graphics for me. But then from the perspective of the NGOs, they speak about some of the barriers, including fertilizer subsidy overshadowing other technologies, inadequate research. There's also a lot of them speaking about inadequate training for the farmers, low priority to support conservation agriculture, and non-incentives for the smallholder farmers for their small-scale activities, which collectively have an impact in catchment management and inadequate training, I mentioned that. And then the important one there in the middle, the first bullet point, with a private financer told us that the NGO model is not investable if such a word exists. The legal entity that they operate in, or the lack of it not being a legal entity with no track record, you cannot invest in it. So that's what we are hoping, that through the creation of the business study or business case, we can partner farmers with the entrepreneurs, either the seed suppliers or input suppliers in the value chain, such that they have a legal entity that a private sector can, for example, look at. So in that on that point, we've got an organization called Water Equity. It's actually a fund of water.org that is considering putting in money to prove the concept of getting some of those farmers to go beyond just an NGO model or a non-commercially viable model and into an investable one. And then continuing with the challenges, I've mentioned that the farmers mentioned that input subsidy program, some of them say it worsens the farmer dependency, and then agriculture in the basin faces resource destruction, and then women and smallholder farmers face food insecurity and labor exploitation. And then the seed laws weakening local seed systems. There's also another example with policy challenges in Zimbabwe. I think recently there was a policy uncertainty around carbon financing, where the government made an announcement that shook up the market. So those are just some of the policies and institutional challenges that were mentioned by the farmers. And then this slide really just shows the improved productivity that one of the farmers has adopted and recorded in terms of yield gains and the labor that they spent on. And then, so here, in terms of mapping the financial mechanisms that we thought, okay, for a private investor, if an NGO is not commercially viable, what are the considerations of financial models that you can look at? And then one, we looked at debt, which the source of capital would come from SACCOs, community banks, warehouse, receipting systems. And then we also looked at credit, which is the input seller or distributors. I know when you mention credit, the whole issues about gender and the lack of people not having collateral or ownership to lend, it comes in. But then, that is not an area where our organization works in. That's why we work with other organizations that would help to lift up the communities that have challenges in terms of land ownership so that they can access credit. And then there's also the public-private partnerships, which we know them quite well. And then there's factoring, there's purchase order finance, there's equity financing, there's grants and in-kind contributions, which we're currently what we're operating on. And then there's the carbon financing, and then the payment for ecosystem services and water funds. So maybe just to highlight one of the payment for ecosystem services, we have implemented this financial model in the Niger Basin, where you partner with a private sector or water utilities that would benefit from the services that farmers perform from their farmland, which the services cumulatively add up to environmental benefits. So if a water utility has to spend less on maintaining their river because there's less sedimentation going into that, then they should be paying the farmer for that. They should be incentivizing the farmer for that. So that's one example of payment for ecosystem services. And then the corporate grants and sustainable procurement, impact investment and conservation finance, and then the crop and weather insurance risk mitigation mechanisms. We also have examples of this that have been implemented across East Africa, which the not your typical big corporates have entered and offered risk protection or de-risking the potential investment before we can bring in a big financier like maybe Development Bank of Southern Africa, or one of the corporate banks. And then, these are just still some of the opportunities or financial mechanisms that you can look at. And then I wanted to maybe emphasize more on the payment for ecosystem. I've just spoken about it, and want to also maybe give credit to to TNC's work around the water funds in Nairobi that they have created, which is also a model that is anchored around this, where, as I mentioned, that the reward offered to farmers or rural landowners in exchange for their voluntary good land management and stewardship of the economic system services. And here also there's opportunity for the governments to come through and finance this model. And then it can also be structured like in a PPP, as I said on the last bullet point. It can be public-private partnership, or it can even be further mix of public and other stakeholder mechanisms that can be included. And then what are the potential needs and partners that in our project, or where SIWI is? We are currently working with ZAMCOM, as I mentioned, which is a government entity. And we're also working with the donor-funded funds, which is DFIs. And we're also looking to bringing in the private sector into that. And then we're also working with the farmers and the farmer organizations. So this include farmer cooperatives that some of them do start to leap towards the criteria of what a private financer would look for. But then they're sitting on a pipeline of still needing project preparation to help them make their model sustainable enough to go and approach a bank like Barclays to be able to look at them. So you find that most of these cooperatives, they're sitting in the pipeline of development financiers, which there's a fund perhaps that needs to be matched by a private financer, but a private financer would not pitch because their criteria to be satisfied are not met by the cooperatives. And then, of course, there was a lot of talk about market and connectivity experts. And this is also one example that there's still need for partnership. I'll give an example with the pilot in Zambia, where the one of the NGOs, which is called Komako, is able to help the farmers with their produce and connect them to the markets, even in seasons where it's not farming seasons. They capacitate them in alternative way of securing their livelihoods, like beehive farming and maybe dried fruit farming, which we're also facilitating a deal for them to get a market with Swedfund in Sweden. So those are just some of the areas where I would like for you to maybe think about it. Where do you see yourselves? And of course, I know there's lots of academia in here, the governments and research policy makers there. There's also opportunity for you to contribute to this, or maybe even point us to examples that already exist, because one financer, for example, they wanted to know what is the actual volumetric benefits of water from the practice of enhanced rainfed agriculture or any of these technologies that we've been speaking of, for them to be able to finance that. And so maybe after this, you can identify and let me know which area that you could support the project in. Let me see if, yeah, and thank you. So this last slide just shows one of the technologies which are being practiced, which is the deep bed farming, where they literally dig pits to trap in the water or slow down rainwater. And you can see for yourselves in terms of which one has produce that has performed better than the other one. Yeah, thank you.
We have time for a couple of quick questions. Please, in the back, Henning.
Very interesting presentation. I have a couple of, thank you very much. I'm not sure whether it works, but a couple of reflections of what you said that really triggered some thinking. You often mention NGOs. What I have experienced in Africa over many, many years is that NGOs come in with stuff that's not necessarily needed. They don't actually ask people, what do you need? And then they disappear again, and then the thing is not appropriate, so it's sitting in a shed broken. So you can go anywhere else, but it's that number. The next one is around finance. He had a finance company there, and he talked about all the things we have done to be making farmers more bankable. and he had secured more customary title for the registers. In the end, what made him more likely to finance while he was there was a farmer from our property. So they were banking. So again, it comes back to profitability. If you prove finance institution that you are bankable, they will bank. And the other thing about, we talk a lot about projects that are failing. And again, at that review meeting last week, the external reviewer kept asking, he was sure he was going to fail when he left. And in the end, the farmers in the they were exhausted because they had explained to him why they were not going to fail. And then they said, maybe the reason why all the projects we talk about are failing was that these projects came and told the farmers what the problem was, when they already had the solution. Whereas our projects were not approached and started talking to farmers about what their problem is and what the solution was.
Thank you.
Okay. I think maybe with the last one, last one and the first one, the NGO and the farmers saying this is their solution. We are partnering with local NGOs which are rooted in the communities. They're not headquartered anywhere outside of Malawi or Zimbabwe that I'm speaking of. And the policies, the challenges that I spoke of there, those were actually from the words of themselves, the farmers, that they're not speaking of big words that we are speaking about when they say there are challenges. Their challenge is to say that I know the technology, it works, but it is back-breaking, and I need a relief for that. So it's not big financial models that they want to have. They believe in the technology that they have. It's just that we call it technology, or it has not been documented, or we call it deep farming today. But then these are practices that their families have utilized in the many years past, and they have confidence in the fact that they work. And also, we know that it works because the food that we consume comes from those farmers. So I echo what you are saying, that it shouldn't be NGOs that, maybe the NGOs are also painted in bad light, but then these are NGOs that are rooted in the communities themselves. They are the ones that are training the farmers to practice, and they do want to adapt to those technologies, but then it's heartbreaking and it's also time consuming to, as some of the barriers why it is not working. I'm sorry, I don't think I got your second point, if you remember it.
My comment about NGOs was not the criticism of what you're doing, it was a reflection of the issue we have.
Yeah.
How do we put in place mechanisms that ensures that when good intention NGOs really want to help, when they come, they bring what is needed. So it wasn't that again at the NGOs.
Okay. Sorry, Mr.
The finance was also made a reflection that that's the profitability aspect. They almost become profitable, they also become bankable.
Yeah. And also, I think if we recognize the value of the work that they do, so not just looking at the production of food, maybe which is really easily visible or tangible, but then for many years, they have been doing work on their farms, which is less destructive to the environment, which has a cumulative benefit for our catchments. And that we are maybe perhaps also a question to ourselves, are we prepared to reward farmers or pay farmers to the true value of the goods or the services that they produce for the environment? So I think also at the end of the day, it's us or the water utilities actually that we are trying to convince that you need to pay farmers. It's not the farmers that we're still going to say this technology works, this technology works. It's the government, it's the water utilities, it's your companies, Coca-Cola, it's your big farming companies that we are trying to convince to say it's time that we pay back the farmers for the value that they contribute to our ecosystems. So I think maybe, yeah, like you said, we're talking a lot, or it's or maybe long overdone that we continue to talk to farmers, rather maybe shift our focus to the people ourselves, the consumers, that we need to start paying for those free services, which are actually priceless.
We want to have room for one or two more questions, but I think I need to say, try to really make your questions succinct and brief so we can get a response to it. Please, Caroline.
Just a very short comment on this whole bankability of farmers and extension. One of the projects that we're doing at the moment is to create a financing facility which is tied with extension. And the financing institutions feel that by providing additional extension to support the farmers, they have a better probability of return on investment. So that's one way that we are combining the two.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that's the role of government, where to provide extension services for the farmers. But in this project, for example, you find that some of the project funds, which is on the pilots, it ends up servicing or buying bikes for extension service officers, which are employed by government, because the government is not showing up. So I cannot agree more than that.
Sarush, you get the final question on this.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3. Yes. Okay, good. Yeah, so I appreciate that. And you summarized, and a number of your slides had a laundry list of all the factors, right? The question is, whose responsibility is to really narrow down some of those to feasible and doable, actionable items? You see, that's sometimes a big problem. We have so much. The question is, do we need an AI system that goes and sorts through them and says these are the first top factors that needs to be done? Because a lot of them, they're there, but the question is what it takes the priority. I don't know.
Okay, I think that can also be a question for all of us, but then, yeah. Yeah, but I'd say maybe for our capacity where we are, because we did try to actually, when we initiated this project, we started off on a Pan-Africa level, and you just saw that it's just too wide. It's so to narrow it down, we decided to go and pilot it in the Zambezi Basin, or we looked at river basin organizations that already seem to have strategic policies that acknowledged what we are advocating for, and use those river basin organizations as champions. And they could choose whichever model that they would like from what we have met. And that is what we are expressing, or maybe refining the applications of ZAMCOM or RASACOM, the Orange Security River Basin, to the GF, to the GCF, and basically in a way to narrow down and not start from the AU level where it is just so complex with so many of these issues. So if we get it right in the Zambezi River Basin, perhaps then it will be easier for us to move it on to the Okavango Basin and find its way to the African Union. But that's just one area. So there's other areas where others can narrow it down either by geographic location or by a financial model that is suitable for that community.
That's a perfect place to end. Let's thank Xanani.